G'day. I intend to vote yes in the referendum on the 14th of October. There are three parts to this referendum and, importantly, the insertion of a new chapter into the Australian Constitution. Chapter 9, Recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The Mabo decision recognised that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples were here long before European colonisers showed up. They've been here continuously for at least 60,000 years, so it's good to see their existence acknowledged in the Constitution. The proposed contents of Chapter 9 are as follows. I hope you're enjoying the curlews out there. In recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia, 1. There shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. 2. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice may make representations to the Parliament and the Executive Government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. 3. The Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice, including its composition, functions, powers and procedures. I want our First Nations people to have a guaranteed say in our Parliament. Over the past 235 years or so, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been subjected to genocide, cultural genocide and forced assimilation. After the government decided that actual genocide was a bit too much on the nose, typically policies have been paternalistic, served up with a large slab of "it's for their own good." That's how we got the stolen generations. That's how we got the intervention. That's how Aboriginal workers' wages were stolen. The government was looking after them because, of course, you couldn't let Aboriginal people actually access the money they'd earned, even when it was only a fraction of the amount that a white person would be paid for doing the same job. There's been lots of virtue signalling in relation to Aboriginal affairs over the years. The Queensland government said, decades after the money had been stolen, that they would give Aboriginal workers back their stolen wages. They waited so long that many of the workers were already dead, and the application process involved a great many hurdles before people had any chance of getting a fairly small sum of money. There was the Royal Commission into Black Deaths in Custody. At best, about 2/3 of the recommendations were ever adopted, and as far as I can tell, they've been quietly dropped since then. There are more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in jail than ever, along with more non-Indigenous people, and they're still dying in custody. There was the apology to the stolen generations. When people who had been ripped away from their families and abused in care tried to sue the government, which had introduced and managed the policy of taking children away from Aboriginal parents, the government somehow managed to claim that they didn't actually have a duty of care. I have never been able to figure out how that worked. It is my hope that the Voice will make it harder for the government to get away with hollow virtue signalling. This referendum has some parallels with the plebiscite on gay marriage, in that it is about the majority deciding whether or not to let a minority have something the rest of us take for granted. Yet the arguments against the Voice look like the usual right-wing fare. They're really rather reminiscent of the arguments against the plebiscite. They're all their favourite words. Risky, unknown, divisive and permanent. Yes, there are some details that we don't know, such as the exact number of representatives. They're being disingenuous when they say that no issue is beyond its scope. You don't have to name groups of people in a piece of legislation to either advantage or disadvantage certain groups. If, for instance, you mandate telephone service providers to provide mobile coverage for everyone who lives within a certain distance of a city centre, but you don't require coverage for people who live in remote areas, you are automatically allowing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to be disadvantaged. Simple example, plenty more like it out there. They're also projecting when they describe the Voice as divisive. Setting members of the community against each other is the right-wing's bread and butter. Remember Joe Hockey and his lifters and leaners? The only lifting Joe Hockey did, by the way, was his fork. They're saying that Indigenous Australians will be the only people in Australia to have their own voice to Parliament, while conveniently forgetting that Parliament itself gives non-Indigenous Australians a loud and permanent voice. The voice is not an end state. Rather, it is a starting point that I hope will lead to better outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia. And that's why I'm going to vote yes. Thank you.